From coast to coast, unlock adventure at Red Lion Hotels by Sonesta, where restful sleep, friendly service, and local knowledge await. Whether for business or pleasure, spend less and make more of every trip. When you sign up for the Sonesta Travel Pass, you'll get their best rates instantly. Go to Sonesta.com to book your stay and unlock their best rates with Sonesta Travel Pass. Here today, roam tomorrow. Join now at Sonesta.com. Terms and conditions apply.
Saks Off Fifth. Up to 70% off every day. Spring is in full swing here at Saks Off Fifth, with so many exciting trends to try. From matching sets and floral dresses to wide-leg jeans and chic accessories, find all of the season's must-have styles. Plus, shop new designer arrivals weekly. Find Gucci, Valentino Garavani, Versace, Stuart Weitzman, and more. Head to SaksOffFifth.com or a Saks Off Fifth store near you for up to 70% off every day.
Hi, this is Mike Ferguson.
And this is Mike Morford, and we want to tell you about our true crime podcast, Criminology.
Launched in 2017, we've covered every kind of case you can imagine, from puzzling missing persons cases to mysterious murders.
Some of the cases we cover are the biggest in true crime history, or they're high-profile cases that are currently making headlines, while some of the cases are fascinating ones you likely haven't heard of.
We cover both solved and unsolved cases, and we have 300 episodes available to binge on right now, including full seasons on the Zodiac Killer, the Golden State Killer, and Ted Bundy.
You can listen to Criminology on your favorite player or app, and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode.
You're listening to DNA ID, brought to you by AbJack Entertainment. Be sure to check out some of the other great true crime podcasts from this network, including The Murder in My Family, Missing Persons, Scene of the Crime, Zodiac Speaking, Beyond Bizarre True Crime, Citizen Detective, and Campus Killings. All of these podcasts are available for you to binge on right now, wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe where you're listening to this podcast so you don't miss an episode.
It was 1998. Dad, Tony Scherer, and 15-year-old son, Stephen, finished up a day of hard work on a farm in Portageville, Missouri. The two worked a full day even though it was Saturday, but as the workday came to an end, Tony called home and asked his wife, Sherri, if she wanted to do pizza that night. Is that even a question? Of course, she said yes. 37-year-old Sherri had stayed home to do laundry, yard work, and other chores that day, and she definitely didn't want to make dinner for the family of four. They agreed that Tony and Stephen would come home and they'd get pizza. Stephen and Tony left the farm they were on, but on their way home, they got stuck in traffic. Now, this isn't an urban area, far from it, but an accident had just happened on a narrow country roadway, and the roadway was blocked by a truck that had crashed. This is the kind of farmland where the county road you're on is the one you need to be on. A detour is a long way out of the way. So they waited. That delay might have saved Tony and Stephen's lives. Since they couldn't get through, Tony and Stephen had to wait. Tony chatted with one of the accident scene guys for 15 to 20 minutes as they waited for a wrecker. Tony told him they were heading home as soon as the road cleared, which it did at 6:50 p.m. The two finally pulled up to their house at 7:05. It was March 28th, so it was nearly dark by this time. The house was quiet. Stephen and Tony walked in through the garage door. Tony's frantic call to the Portageville police came in at 7:09 p.m. Officer Mark Stockton was dispatched to the Scherer home, Captain Fred Hill immediately behind him. The house was about a mile and a half outside town. The officers arrived at 7:16. Tony and Stephen were outside the house waiting for the police. They had turned on the outside lights to help the first responders find them, and what they had to tell the officers was horrific. Stephen and Tony had walked into the house. Tony sifted idly through the mail in the hallway, but Stephen saw something in the living room. He found his mother and his sister dead on the living room floor with bloody wounds to their heads. Tony felt his wife for a pulse. She had none, but her body was still warm. Stephen touched his sister's wrist, but it was obvious she was dead. Tony called the police from the countertop landline phone in the kitchen. Hill and Stockton went into the house, followed by Tony. He directed them to the living room. Sherri Scherer was lying on the floor face down. Her jeans, pink shirt, and work boots were still on. A sock had been stuffed into her mouth as a gag. Her left arm was behind her with her hand on her back, as if her arm had been twisted behind her. She had a bloody head wound and blood was on the carpet below her head. I probably don't need to tell you that she was dead. 12-year-old Megan's little body was a ghastly sight even for a seasoned law enforcement officer. Megan was lying to the right of her mother, sort of on the brick hearth. She was face down on the floor, her hips propped up on a green pillow or beanbag. She was gagged with a sock, too. Her hands were tied with intricate knots behind her back with orange electrical cord. Her t-shirt was pulled up and her bra askew, exposing her left breast. She was naked from the waist down except for her red sweatpants and underwear hanging off her right ankle. Feces was on the floor and on her posterior. It was evident to the officers that she had been sexually assaulted. The pillow under her hips was on top of a lot of blood on the floor, indicating that Megan had been posed this way after she was killed. Under her body were a Walmart bag, a blanket, and the Wall Street Journal and some other newspapers, all stained with blood. Like Sherri's, Megan's head was bloody. I'm sure the officers prayed that Sherri was already dead when whatever was done to her little girl was done. 2 ambulance personnel, the EMTs, Larry Swilley and Francis Locks, arrived, and they checked the bodies and came back out. Everyone left the house, and crime scene tape went up. Officer Mark Stockton, one of the first responders at the scene, later told KFVS-12, quote, "I would say that's probably the worst thing that I've ever seen in my life." Portageville Police Chief Ronnie Adams told the TV news station, quote, "I've been an officer over 40 years, and that scene right there affected me more than any scene I've ever been at." New Madrid County Prosecutor's investigator Terry Stevens, who went on to serve as county sheriff for many years, also came to the scene. He told the Standard Democrat, quote, "I've seen a lot of things that people can only fathom seeing, but when I went home that night, I just couldn't get the scene out of my head." The troops were called in. Missouri State Highway Patrol's Troop E unit of the Division of Drug and Crime Control, the DDCC, crime scene personnel, the medical examiner, the prosecutor's office. This was a big deal, the in cold blood level murder of a nice farming family in a sleepy farm town. At 8:35 p.m., Sheriff Gary Hill, Coroner Tim Clayton, and Assistant Coroner Ralph Barnwell arrived and entered the Scherer home. At 8:37, both victims were pronounced dead by the sheriff and coroner. Coroner Clayton took custody of Sherri's body and transported her to the autopsy after photographing the body in place and making sure to bag her hands to prevent the loss of any possible evidence. As for Megan, I addressed a little bit ago about how difficult it was for even the seasoned investigators to view her body. Missouri State Highway Patrol investigator Don Wyndham, who led the team processing the scene and the house, told KFVS-12, quote, "It was obvious the target of this was Megan, the young girl. Not only was she assaulted and shot, and just horribly, she was posed, like he wanted to show what he had done." Missouri State Highway Patrol Troop E's crime scene unit was requested to assist the New Madrid County Sheriff's Office. This crime was too big, too serious, for the New Madrid and Portageville authorities to take on alone. The MSHP provided a team of experienced CSIs to process the scene, led by investigator Wyndham. Megan's body was processed and a trove of potential evidence collected. There was a hair on her buttocks, one on her neck, one on her leg, one in her left hand, and a hair in her vaginal area that did not belong there. Swabs were collected from Megan's back and buttocks. There was a visible spot that looked like a bite mark on Megan's exposed left breast, and swabs were collected of a dried substance there, later determined to be saliva. Then Megan's hands were bagged, and she, too, was transported by Coroner Clayton for autopsy. Meanwhile, Tony and Stephen both told the same story. They came home and went in the house, which was unlocked the way they typically left it. Tony sifted through the mail in the hall, but Stephen glanced into the living room. When he saw his mom lying on the floor, he thought she was being funny, until he saw the blood. Stephen said that he had touched his sister's wrist and it was cold. It seemed to him she'd been dead for a while. Officers at the scene had observed gunshot wounds to the heads of both Megan and Sherri, and in fact, when Tony called 911, He reported that his wife and daughter had been shot. When the two were autopsied the next day, shooting was the confirmed cause of death for both victims. Megan's autopsy was first. It was conducted on March 29, 1998, at the Mineral Area Hospital in Farmington, Missouri, at 10:15 a.m. Pathologist Dr. Michael Zitricki performed the autopsy, which was attended by New Madrid County Coroner Tim Clayton, New Madrid County Deputy Frank Masterson, Missouri State Highway Patrol Sergeant Bill Conway, and Missouri State Highway Patrol Sergeant Don Wyndham. Photographs were taken of the body, which arrived wrapped in the white sheet and body bag placed on her at the scene. With bags present on her hands and right foot, the left was covered by her pants. All of these items were retained. The orange extension cord binding her wrists behind her back was removed and kept in evidence as well. Megan was gagged with a sock, which was removed and placed in evidence. It was noted she'd been shot through the jaw, which exhibited a through-and-through wound traveling from the left side of her chin through the right side of her chin. Stippling was present on the wound that was to the left side of the chin, which indicated that the left side wound was the entrance wound. A second gunshot wound was present on the left front of Megan's forehead, and there was no exit wound. X-rays were taken which showed a bullet present inside the skull, which was recovered. Dr. Zitricki then administered a sexual assault kit, which consisted of anal and vaginal swabs, hair, blood, urine, numerous other swabs, and fingernail cuttings and scrapings. No semen was detected, but trace amounts of isopropyl myristate, a chemical found in certain medicated lotions, was found on Megan's vaginal swabs. A gunshot residue test was administered, and Megan's body was examined for latent prints and her own fingerprints taken for elimination purposes. Her clothing was also collected into evidence. These were a pair of red sweatpants, a pair of underwear, a white t-shirt, and a bra. The autopsy on Sherri was conducted on the same day at the same hospital at 3:30. Pathologist Dr. Zitricki performed this autopsy as well, which was attended by all the same observers. Sherri's body was photographed, and the sock gag that was in her mouth and tied around her head was removed and retained, as were the bags on her hands and her body bag. A hair was collected from the sock gag. Marks on Sherri's wrists indicated that she'd been bound at some point, but the bindings had been removed and were not found by CSIs. Dr. Zitricki observed that 3 entrance gunshot wounds were visible on the back of Sherri's head. There were no exit wounds. X-rays were then taken which showed 3 bullets present in her skull, which were removed and placed into evidence. Dr. Zitricki administered a sexual assault kit, which consisted of anal and vaginal swabs, hair, blood, urine, fingernail cuttings and scrapings, and so on. He concluded that Sherri had not been sexually assaulted. He also did a gunshot residue test. Sherri's fingerprints were taken for elimination purposes, and her clothing was collected into evidence, inventoried as a maroonish pink shirt, a bra, blue jeans, underwear, socks, and boots. Both Sherri and Megan were determined to have been shot with a .22 caliber weapon, and the bullets removed from their heads would prove to be very important later. Neither of the two had any defensive wounds. It was becoming clear that whoever had killed them had subdued them with his weapon, tied them up, gagged them, and then shot them both in the head at close range. The reasons for the shot through Megan's jaw were unknown, but one could speculate that perhaps she tried to turn her head to avoid a shot to the head. Try as they might, CSIs were unable to find the bullet that had passed through her jaw. They even dismantled the entire sofa that sat across from her. I was told it's suspected that the bullet shattered into tiny shards that were impossible to locate in the farmhouse.
From coast to coast, unlock adventure at Red Lion Hotels by Sonesta, where restful sleep, friendly service, and local knowledge await. Whether for business or pleasure, spend less and make more of every trip. When you sign up for the Sonesta Travel Pass, you'll get their best rates instantly. Go to Sonesta.com to book your stay and unlock their best rates with Sonesta Travel Pass. Here today, roam tomorrow. Join now at Sonesta.com. Terms and conditions apply.
When you're in HR, it can feel like nothing is easy. From payroll to PTO, from onboarding to benefits, and everything in between. It's a constant juggle of tasks, systems, and spreadsheets. But your HR software? That's the easy part. Meet Bamboo HR. Trusted by over 34,000 companies, it handles all your HR tasks, payroll, benefits, and time tracking, so your team and your company can grow as fast as, well, Bamboo. And Bamboo HR software is actually easy to use. One simple system system that pulls all your people data together in one place so you can ditch scattered systems and wasted hours on tasks that should only take minutes. Because when HR is easier, you can focus on what matters most, your people. HR is hard. Bamboo HR is easy. Ready to simplify all your HR tasks? For a limited time, get a $100 Visa gift card when you complete a free demo at bamboohr.com/gift card. Again, that's bamboohr.com/gift card. Terms and conditions apply.
For period protection you can put on and forget about, nothing beats Knix leak-proof underwear. North America's #1 leak-proof underwear brand. Let's face it, life can be unpredictable, but your leak-proof underwear shouldn't be. That's why millions of people choose Knix. For periods, for light leaks, for everyday freshness. Knix undies are super comfy, super absorbent, and made to handle whatever your day throws at you. Day 2 of your period? Covered. Your daily run? No problem. That big sneeze? You know the one. Yep, we've got you. And with styles like bikinis, boy shorts, thongs, and high-rise, plus sizes from extra small to 4XL, Knix makes it easy to find your perfect fit. Say goodbye to stress and leaks and say hello to undies that work just as hard as you do, no matter the leak. Find the style and level of protection you want at Knix.com and use code FLOW15 for 15% off. That's KNIX.com, code FLOW15 for 15% off. Knix, for your leaks, for your life.
So who were Sherri and Megan? Sherri Ann Walker was born on August 18, 1959, to parents Earl and Frances. She was a lifelong Missourian. In fact, she had been born right there in Portageville. She and Tony had been married for about 17 years, and their son Stephen was 15. Megan, born on October 2, 1985 in Blytheville, Arkansas, was 12. Sherri was not known to have any enemies and no bad blood with anyone. The same was true with Megan, of course, who was only 12. Megan was a typical little girl who loved to dance and spend time with her friends. Her 14-year-old second cousin who went to school with her said nothing unusual happened there and that everyone at school liked Megan. Tony said the couple didn't have problems with anyone. He didn't owe anyone any money. He didn't gamble. In fact, 4 people owed him money. He often helped friends out with small loans, but the max was $400, not worth killing 2 people over. Tony believed that his wife was faithful, but told the investigators that Sherri had had a problem with alcohol in the 1987 timeframe. She had received treatment at a rehab center in Kentucky and had been fine ever since. A couple of Sherri's close friends told the police in confidence that there had been some serious marital problems, specifically infidelity, in Tony and Sherri's relationship. But that had happened nearly a decade earlier. They all said things were great now between Sherri and Tony. They were the typical middle American farming family who worked hard, went to church, spent time with their family and friends. The couple was conservative with their spending, but they had just redone part of the kitchen and had new floors put in the house, and Sherri was very proud of the work. Tony told the investigators that Sherri was naturally a cautious person and would never have just let anyone in the house. No one, and I mean no one, could name a single person who might have done this. After the bodies were removed, Missouri State Highway Patrol Sergeant Don Wyndham, Corporal R.J. Sanders, and new Madrid County Deputy Frank Masterson got to work on the scene. Sheriff Gary Hill videotaped the entire house. The brick house on County Road 419 was a one-level ranch with wood trim. It had 3 small sheds or outbuildings for storing farm and garden equipment and an above-ground pool. The 2-car carport had a car and pickup truck parked in it. It was noted that all the doors and windows of the house were unlocked, save one screen door. There was no reason to lock the place, frankly. No one in Portageville was really concerned about security. The house didn't appear disturbed except one kitchen drawer was open, and a crumpled hand towel was in the sink of the hallway powder room. A plate of gnawed rib bones was on the stove. The bedrooms were neat and tidy except Megan's, in which the bed wasn't made and some clothes were on the floor. CSIs found 2 .22 caliber handguns in a closet in the master bedroom, and a knife belonging to Stephen in his bedroom. Then there was the living room where the bodies had been found, with its old-fashioned white floral wallpaper and brick hearth. The television set was on, and the lights in the living room were also on. A large white ceramic vase of artificial flowers was toppled over and lay on the floor at the entrance to the living room. An ironing board was set up, and numerous folded clothes were in a pile on the couch. The room looked like the living room of a typical family: Uno cards, a bowl of popcorn, a golf putter, a book of poems, a Game Boy. Lots of pubic hairs were on the floor at the scene. I was told there were enough to knit a blanket, which was fantastic for evidentiary purposes. The CSIs collected all these, plus everything else, the stuff that had been under Megan's body, the feces, swabs of blood on the floor and the fireplace. They also collected some of the blood-soaked carpet padding from under the bodies. A bottle of Lubriderm was also collected because, well, you know. They gathered up the towel from the bathroom and the family's home answering machine. Police picked up a Miller Lite can on the gravel road leading to the house, as well as a sample of dirt from the Scherers' dirt driveway that appeared to be wet. The water spot on the driveway made them think the killer maybe had a radiator leak. But the water could also have come from the ambulance that had sat in the driveway for some time. There were no helpful tire tracks in the driveway because both the Scherers and first responders had driven on it. Oddly, the safe in the house was found open, but all the items that had been in it were still in it. Police wondered whether Sherri had been forced to open the safe under duress, but the killer had been disappointed to find nothing of immediate value inside. Tony could not identify anything missing from the house. The entire house was processed for latent prints, but the only one found that was foreign to the family was a fingerprint on one of the newspapers under Megan's body, and it didn't match to anyone. While the CSIs were still working on the scene in the house, Corporal William Bud Cooper, who's now New Madrid County Sheriff, set up a command post at the MSHP Armory. He later told KFVS 12, quote, "We had a lot of officers come in from the area. I'd say ultimately we ended up with 75 to 100 police officers here," end quote. They were going to need all of them. On the morning after the bodies were found at 9 a.m., 5 teams of officers were assigned to conduct grid searches of the Scherer property and beyond. This extended about 3/4 of a mile in every direction, but nothing of evidentiary value was found. Meanwhile, investigators sat down with Stephen and Tony to try to get a handle on the timeline. Stephen and Tony had left the house that Saturday morning around 7:30, so Tony could drop Stephen off to work on a tractor in the farm fields in Conrad. Tony returned home and then went to help his own father in the shop over at his place. Stephen and Tony both had lunch with his parents. Sherri and Megan stayed home that morning. Several people saw Sherri outside the house that day. A friend who knew her well saw her outside at 11 a.m. and stopped and chatted for maybe 10 minutes. She said Sherri was in great spirits and all seemed well. Sherri's best friend, the two went to school together, both had 2 kids the same age, they vacationed together and had Super Bowl parties and so on, told the police that Sherri had come into the store she and her husband owned, the Garden Center, at 248 West Highway 162 around noon on Saturday. Sherri bought some seed scoops and seemed great and upbeat as usual. Then, sometime after lunch, Sherri and Megan went to the older Scherers farm and worked on a wheat drill for an hour. Tony told the police that the last time he saw Sherri was around 1:15 on Saturday. She was in the backyard with the 2 dogs on leashes, and she was cleaning out the dog pens. Megan was in the yard as well. Tony drove to Conrad where Stephen was working on the tractor, and at around 4:15, the 2 men drove out to the river where they had some nets out fishing. At 6:24 p.m., Stephen called the house from his dad's car phone and talked to Sherri. He called to ask if he could hang out with his girlfriend that evening. He said Sherri sounded normal and told him his girlfriend had already called and it was totally fine for them to hang out later. So Stephen and Tony headed home. But on the way, they saw some police activity near Highway 162 where a fertilizer truck had overturned. As I mentioned in the intro, the truck was blocking the entire roadway, so they had to wait for it to be pulled out. Tony called home from his cell phone to let Sherri know they would be a little later than planned. The first time, he got a busy signal, and the second, he called 30 seconds later, he left a message telling her to call his cell. That was around 6:45, Tony guessed. Sherri did not call his cell phone. They finally got home at 7:05 p.m. Stephen had talked to Sherri at 6:24 and she had sounded normal, but by the time the 2 men got home, she and Megan were dead. The entire thing had happened in the space of 41 minutes. The Scherer double murder appeared to be a personal crime with a woman and child shot in the head. Someone seemed out for vengeance. But within the first few days of the investigation, police struck out in finding someone who had it out for the Scherers. They were going to have to look deeper. Police interviewed Tony and Stephen again about a week after the murders, on April 8th, just to see if they remembered anything else. They asked Tony whether anyone would know that he and Stephen were not home that day and that Megan and Sherri were home alone. He said no, because their work didn't really follow any specific schedule. Tony emphasized that Sherri was not the type to open the door just to anyone. The investigators asked about the family's 2 large dogs, at least one of which was a large Rottweiler named Bruno. Tony was adamant that the dogs would absolutely have attacked someone hurting Megan and Sherri if they'd been loose. But the dogs were no longer allowed in the house. They lived in the outdoor pen and shelter where they had been put since the family had put new floors in the farmhouse the previous fall. Tony said when he and Stephen got home, the dogs were in the pen. Neither of them could recall whether the dogs were barking when they found the bodies. They were too distracted by the devastating scene in the living room. Police asked Tony whether they thought this crime was committed as a crime of opportunity or whether his family was targeted for some specific reason. Tony was clueless. He said he had no idea. It was anyone's guess. Corporal Larry Plunkett wrote in his report, quote, "As Tony and I spoke about the investigation, he became tearful and choked up as he spoke. He stated that he and his wife fought hard but loved hard. He said he was really starting to, quote, miss my ladies." I'll say right here and now that police considered Tony and Stephen for a very few days and whether they could have done this, but all signs pointed to no, and plenty of people had seen them at the scene of the accident with the overturned truck. Tony's cell phone reflected the call to the house when Sherri did not answer, and Stephen's call at 6:24. Their location at a place other than home could be verified for much of the evening. Police were going to have to look somewhere else. The officers talked to a teenage boy who told them that he'd spoken with Megan around 2:15 on the phone that Saturday. They were on the phone for close to half an hour, he said. Megan told him she was watching TV and she was super bored. Another friend of Megan's talked to her around 3 and said she was acting normal. And yet another friend talked to her at 4:30. All of these friends said they couldn't think of anyone who would want to hurt Megan. They talked to Stephen's girlfriend, who had called the house around 4. She spoke with Sherri and said she sounded completely normal. Sherri's mom told the police she spoke with her daughter between 3 and 4 on Saturday afternoon. Sherri was behaving totally normally and didn't say anything about expecting any visitors or having a meeting with anyone. They branched out to interviews of all the couple's friends and colleagues. They all said they knew of no enemies that the couple had. Tony was known to be a generous person, a good boss, and had a successful farm. Neither he nor Sherri had any bad habits or addictions or owed anyone money. Their marriage had been in trouble in the past, but it had been rock solid for several years now. The family had been voted Family of the Week at their Catholic church the previous week. 3 intriguing leads went nowhere. First, one guy to whom Tony had loaned money 2 years earlier had reportedly gotten angry and threatened Tony. Police interviewed him, and he said he had no beef with Tony anymore and he had an alibi. Second, police got a tip from a man who said he had overheard another guy saying he was going to get even with Tony for turning in his meth lab, located at a residence on Route 162. Tony said he did call it a meth lab, but it was years ago. This led nowhere. Then police interviewed a male friend of Sherri's, a previous work colleague from when they both worked at Noranda Aluminum in the late 80s. There had been rumors about the two being involved. The man said he hadn't had contact with her since 1989 other than running into her in town. Investigative follow-up proved he wasn't the guy who brutally killed Sherri and her little daughter. While some investigators were digging into the Scherers' personal lives, other officers canvassed the neighbors to see if anyone had seen or heard anything. Because the setting was farmland, none of the neighbors were right next door. Officers went door to door among the widespread homes, soliciting information about the murders, whether anyone had seen any unfamiliar people in the area, and so on. Sherri had been seen in her yard around 3 o'clock p.m. by one of the neighbors along with her dog Bruno. Another neighbor drove by at 6:10 p.m. and Sherri waved at him. In fact, at least 5 people said they drove by around 6 o'clock that Saturday evening and saw Sherri outside working in the yard. Lots of people saw her in the yard that evening and she waved hello to everyone she knew. Of course, we know she was in the farmhouse by 6:24 p.m. when Stephen called her on the house phone. I will say all these neighbors of the Scherers were very observant. These were country folk who paid attention to strangers or things that were different from the daily routine. Police asked about unfamiliar persons and or vehicles being seen in the area and got many reports from the neighbors that they saw a van or a pickup that they'd never seen before, or a person they'd never seen riding a four-wheeler, or a man walking with a backpack or a hitchhiker. All of these leads had to be run down by the police. There were some vehicle sightings that stood out. One neighbor said around sundown on Saturday he saw a dark-colored older model pickup being driven by an older white male in a baseball hat. The man was somewhere between 40 and 60, of heavy build, driving really slow on County Road 420 eastbound. He noticed the guy because he had never seen the car before, and the driver was driving super slow and seemed to be sitting really low in the seat. Another person called the police and said that around 6:45 on the night of the murders, he saw a small red Buick speeding down County Road 421 toward the intersection of Missouri 162. The timing was pretty much exactly right on this sighting, so that vehicle remained of interest. Another neighbor saw a brown or tan pickup he'd never seen before driving down the road the Scherers lived on. A pizza delivery guy had also seen a tan pickup near the Scherers' home, driving fast around 6:40 p.m. on Saturday. The driver was a white male with collar-length brown hair. Another close-by neighbor saw a 4-door tan sedan sometime between 12 and 3 driving from north to south on County Road 419. This neighbor, who lived pretty close to the Scherers, said something else important. She had not heard the Scherers' dogs barking at all. She said usually when outsiders were around, the dogs would bark. Other vehicle sightings reported by people in town were also prioritized. They talked to a guy at the Simmons service station. He had charged the car battery of a guy driving an older model gray Chrysler sedan. The driver made a collect phone call from the payphone and told the listener that he had just gotten out of prison in Texas. He then left without paying. Police noted the tipster's description of the dead battery guy as a dirty white male, about 40 years old, heavy build, long dark hair tied back in a ponytail, wearing a dirty white t-shirt and blue jeans. They talked to another witness who had reported a custom gray van just sitting on the shoulder of I-55 just north of town. This was right around 6:20 p.m. And Portageville police officer Freddie Hill also noted a suspicious van he saw at the Gas and Go Amoco station in town on March 28th around 5:30. He noted it had out-of-state plates and the driver was walking around with a holstered knife in his belt. All of these vehicle sightings were documented and tracked. Investigators knew that the killer had almost certainly arrived and fled in a vehicle. Someone had to have seen something.
From coast to coast, unlock adventure at Red Lion Hotels by Sonesta, where restful sleep, friendly service, and local knowledge await. Whether for business or pleasure, spend less and make more of every trip. When you sign up for the Sonesta Travel Pass, you'll get their best rates instantly. Go to Sonesta.com to book your stay and unlock their best rates with Sonesta Travel Pass. Here today, roam tomorrow. Join now at Sonesta.com. Terms and conditions apply.
When you're in HR, it can feel like nothing is easy. From payroll to PTO, from onboarding to benefits, and everything in between. It's a constant juggle of tasks, systems, and spreadsheets. But your HR software? That's the easy part. Meet Bamboo HR. Trusted by over 34,000 companies, it handles all your HR tasks, payroll, benefits, and time tracking, so your team and your company can grow as fast as, well, Bamboo. And Bamboo HR software is actually easy to use. One simple system that pulls all your people data together in one place, so you can ditch scattered systems and wasted hours on tasks that should only take minutes. Because when HR is easier, you can focus on what matters most, your people. HR is hard. Bamboo HR is easy. Ready to simplify all your HR tasks? For a limited time, get a $100 Visa gift card when you complete a free demo at bamboohr.com/gift card. Again, that's bamboohr.com/gift card. Terms and conditions apply.
Let's be honest. Most of us have a love-hate relationship with wired bras. We love the lift, but hate the digging. We love the support, but hate feeling trapped. Well, Knix just changed everything with FreeFlex, a wired bra actually designed to work with your body, not against it. FreeFlex features a revolutionary flexible wire that moves when you move, bends when you bend, and keeps everything exactly where you want it. No poking, no stabbing, no constant readjusting, just freedom to move. It also has a demi-cup shape for a natural lift with a lower neckline that flatters in everything from V-necks to dresses. And because it's from Knix, it's available in sizes for every body. Experience the first wired bra you'll actually want to wear all day. Visit Knix.com for 15% off your order with FreeFlex15. That's KNIX.com, code FreeFlex15 for 15% off. Knix.com.
The lab reports started to trickle in, informing the investigators about what they had to work with. As the medical examiner had observed, no semen was found in the sexual assault kits. A swab from Megan's body had picked up that substance I named earlier, the chemical, and the substance on the bite mark on her breast was saliva. They tested the tube sock gags and the electrical cord binding Megan's wrists for DNA and struck out. The electrical cord, which had been looped around Megan's wrists and tied with overhand knots, had no prints on it either, which meant the killer had probably worn gloves. The tests also detected no foreign DNA under Megan and Sherri's nails, supporting the theory that they had not been able to defend themselves, likely because they were subdued with a gun and then tied up. Many hairs were collected from the crime scene and from Megan and Sherri's bodies that were determined not to be theirs. These included 2 dark brown Caucasian pubic hairs, one of which was found in Megan's hand, and 1 4-inch medium brown Caucasian head hair. Mitochondrial DNA testing, which was what the crime lab was doing back in 1999, confirmed that both pubic hairs originated from the same individual or persons maternally related to them. They were assumed to be from the killer. Attempts were made to obtain a DNA profile from the plentiful supply of pubic hairs. It was 1998. CODIS was fully up and running, but DNA analysis was not where it is today, and the CODIS database was still relatively sparse. Some of the foreign pubic hairs were subjected to a PCR-based analysis of STR genes at LabCorp. In short, lab analysts were able to obtain a partial DNA profile from the hairs, but it had an insufficient number of loci to be entered into CODIS. The partial DNA profile was sufficient only for comparison purposes. The investigators collected pubic hair samples from both Stephen and Tony for elimination purposes, and then they started collecting samples from 15 men whom they considered persons of interest and comparing them all. Note that the saliva sample that was taken from the bite mark on Megan's left breast bore markers consistent with the partial DNA profile from the pubic hairs. The same person who had bitten Megan had left his pubic hair all over the place, but no semen. What the heck was going on here? Portageville's population in 1998 was about 3,800 people. I think police talked to every one of them. They contacted all the farmers in the area and tried to interview all the farm workers. They gathered a lot of tips from people that there was a large crack problem in town, and people would use the Scherers' dirt road to go back and party. A farm worker at the farm adjacent to the Scherers had reported to police something they already knew. The town had a crack problem. And a man who used to work for Tony and had since moved to a new town gave some names of crank users who were known to break into houses and steal stuff. Police checked all area abandoned houses and outbuildings, sheds, barns, silos. They got a list from Tony of everyone who could possibly have had access to the house over the past few months. For example, he had hired a temporary worker a few months earlier and had some other seasonal farmhands. He had a guy out from the water company to install a new water meter and water lines. The Terminix pest control guy had been there the week before. Some guy had delivered cut wood a while back. The cops talked to all these people, including a guy who had roofed the Scherers' house who was on probation for forgery and was in rehab for crack addiction. It wasn't him or any of the others. They interviewed all the known sex offenders in the area and tracked down their alibis. They were all asked for pubic hair samples for comparison to those in evidence. They gathered the names of all Megan's close friends and her schoolmates, and even searched her desk at school. They interviewed the girls on her basketball team and tracked down a man seen chatting with Megan outside the gym the previous week. They checked with local service providers, fuel truck drivers, gas company drivers, phone company drivers, newspaper delivery guys, etc. They pulled mobile phone records for Sherri and Tony. They collected the funeral guest list. And they gathered the names of all New Madrid and Pemiscot County residents with registered .22 caliber handguns. They also asked the local pawn shop owner to hand over all records of sales of .22s. The investigators had the lab examine Sherri and Megan's clothing for gunpowder residue. Their testing revealed the presence of smokeless powder particles of a size indicating it was manufactured by Winchester or Hogden. They gathered the names of employees of large area businesses like Bloomsdale Excavating and Noranda Aluminum and ECI Electric, noting the names of every employee who was working that day. They collected the names of everybody registered at the local motels during that week. They pulled together a list of all parishioners at the St. Eustatius Catholic Church in Portageville that the Scherer family regularly attended. They looked into whether Megan could have been targeted by an online predator who was communicating with her, but there was no indication she had access to a computer. The investigators also tried to tie up all the loose ends they could find to make sure they had a thorough understanding of what had happened in the timeline. They spent a lot of time trying to figure out whether Sherri had actually ever ordered a pizza, because if she had made a phone call ordering a large pepperoni, it could have helped narrow the timeline down further. The Scherers usually ordered from Gator's Pizza in Portageville, but the owner had no record of a call from Sherri that night. This indicated that the killer had likely gotten to her sometime between Stephen's 6:24 p.m. call home and when Sherri would have ordered the pizza soon thereafter. Then there was the electrical cord. A lot of work was done to try to find where the electrical cord tying up Megan had come from. The cord was an 18-3 size copper wire, one green wire, one white, and one black, lined in white insulation inside the orange cover. The 40-inch segment of a longer cord had been severed with a tool like scissors. The cord did not belong to Tony, and the killer was believed to have brought it to the scene. Missouri State Highway Patrol Officer Bill Clayton went to the hardware stores in town. He learned that the cord was manufactured by Woods Wire Products Incorporated at 510 3rd Avenue Southwest in Carmel, Indiana. The cord itself was manufactured in Mexico. This specific cord was sold in 15, 25, and 50-foot lengths. The crazy thing was that the killer had cut off the male end of the cord, the plug, which was where the product-specific identification numbers were located. If they had had that end of the cord, they would have been able to determine exactly where the cord had been purchased. I was told that the investigators believed that the killer just got lucky here, and it was likely not a deliberate step on his part to disinclude the identifying end of the cord. Okay, let's talk about a suspect or two. One neighbor who lived very near the Scherers raised suspicions right away and stayed atop the suspect list for a long time. This guy, whose initials are RN, knew the Scherers well and had gone to school with both Sherri and Tony. His family lived on the adjacent farm. RN had been over to the Scherers' house a number of times. Trooper Freddie Butler stopped over at RN's parents' farmhouse on the night of the murders, and RN drew their attention right away. He ran out of the house when the officer arrived, seemingly overexcited about the police being there, and he blurted out that he had taken a shower that night. He was very upset about the murders and said he had seen Sherri at the high school on Tuesday when she was dropping off golf clubs for Stephen. RN admitted to owning a .22 caliber weapon, but he didn't know where it was, he said. His car was also not there. He said he'd left it at work. Officer Butler noted that RN said he had spent the evening working in the family's farm shop, which was a mere 1/4 mile from the Scherers' home. Corporal Larry Plunkett interviewed RN at Portageville Police Station on March 29th. Police were definitely suspicious of him, not only because of his proximity to the Scherers and knowing them and claiming not to know where his gun was, but because RN was a little bit odd. He was quiet, kept to himself, lived with his parents when he was in his 40s, didn't socialize in town, and there were rumors about his involvement, I think because people thought he was a strange bird. In this interview, RN said that he and the Scherers were not close but were neighborly. He admitted buying Girl Scout cookies and other subscriptions from Megan, who would come over periodically selling these items for school. Corporal Plunkett observed that RN was very uneasy with the questioning, evasive in his responses, moved around in his chair, and made little eye contact when giving an answer to a specific question. It's unclear whether it was just an interrogation tactic to tell RN that someone had told the police that they saw him in the Scherers' driveway on the day of the murder, or whether someone really had said they saw him there. But it rattled RN, and he said things like, "Y'all got me thinking maybe I've done things I haven't." The investigators asked if RN had ever had romantic thoughts about either of the victims, and the police felt he never gave a direct answer. He breathed heavily, their notes say. Plunkett asked him outright if he'd killed Megan and Sherri. RN paused, stuttered, and then denied it. RN was read his Miranda rights and agreed to give head and pubic hair samples and fingerprints. They also collected the t-shirt and jeans he said he wore that day, and they executed a search warrant at his house on April 30th. They didn't find anything, but they set out to investigate his alibi. RN said that on the day of the murders he had been working on some equipment on the family's farm shop. This was the shed that was a 1/4 mile from the Scherers' home. RN said he went into town to buy a part for his broken tractor at Baker Implement. He arrived there just before 5 p.m., which he remembered because the store closed at 5. He got back to the shop around 5:30. The hired man, whom I'm calling Ed, was there and was fixing to leave for the day but was waiting for his weekly paycheck. RN wrote Ed a check, and Ed left around 5:45. After that, RN left as well and got to his parents' house around 6:07. After his dad finished feeding the cows, during which time they were separated for about 10 minutes, verified by the dad, they went back to work on the tractor. They quit for the night around 7, went into the house, and caught the last few minutes of the Kentucky game on TV. RN's dad and sister verified all this and said RN went home around 8. Police verified that the game was on TV at the time and verified with Bakers that RN had been in to buy a part for his tractor. They even verified what he was wearing that day to be sure he had handed over the correct clothing. Police talked to RN's longtime farmhand, the one I'm calling Ed. They were clearly interested in Ed, too, because he knew the Scherers pretty well. In fact, he had bought his truck from Tony 6 months earlier. Ed said he left work on RN's family farm at 5:45 that evening, and as he drove off, he saw Sherri in her yard with the dog Bruno. Sherri waved at him. Then he drove into town and went to a convenience store where he bought soda and chips shortly after 6 p.m. He went to the car wash and did some other stuff, and then he was stopped at the roadblock on his way home. Ed said he hadn't seen anyone strange in the area on the evening of the murders. Missouri State Highway Patrol Corporal Richard Sanders interviewed Ed again on March 30th. They made him go over the timeline of his day in detail. They even took his photo to the convenience store and car wash to verify that he'd been there. Ed admitted that he was friends with the Scherers and was familiar with the interior of their home. The corporal asked Ed flat out whether he'd killed Megan and Sherri, and he said no. Ed stated that Tony and Sherri were good friends and were a good family, and if the punishment was up to him, he would, quote, nail them by their balls to a tree, and if they could get themselves loose, then he would shoot them, end quote. When Corporal Sanders asked if there was anything he could add, Ed stated, quote, whoever did this had to be someone that knew them. Speaking of people who knew them, Sanders asked Ed about RN. Ed said RN was a little strange and acknowledged that people around town talked about him because he was a loner. But he didn't have any reason to think that RN was the man who had shot Megan and Sherri to death. Both RN and Ed gave head hair, pubic hair, and saliva samples for elimination purposes. Police couldn't find anything linking either one of them to the crime. They moved on. Police investigated a whole lot of other men. One was a 17-year-old neighbor of the Scherers who was new to the area and had a fishy alibi. Another was the subject of a tip. They got word that a guy had banged on a local family's door at 11 p.m. on the night of the murder, yelling, "Let me in. My brother got hold of some bad stuff and said he's killed a couple people." These two brothers were tripping on God knows what substances and had caravaned to this house where they knew some people, demanding to be let inside. The brother, the one who allegedly said he had killed two folks, then came up to the glass door and said, "Let me in. It ain't like I'm going to cut your fucking throat." They were looking for a guy they knew and said they were too drunk or high to drive. The husband of the household drove them off with a shotgun and called the police. The investigators tracked down this duo of rocket scientists and questioned them. They both said they were high and just talking shit. They both gave hair and saliva samples for comparison. Police investigated a lot of small-town guys like this. There was a lot of talking to people whose activity for the night in question was drinking and driving around, hanging out at the river bottom, and hitting Casey's General Store for snacks and cigs.
From coast to coast, unlock adventure at Red Lion Hotels by Sonesta, where restful sleep, friendly service, and local knowledge await. Whether for business or pleasure, spend less and make more of every trip. When you sign up for the Sonesta Travel Pass, you'll get their best rates instantly. Go to Sonesta.com to book your stay and unlock their best rates with Sonesta Travel Pass. Here today, roam tomorrow. Join now at Sonesta.com. Terms and conditions apply.
When you're in HR, it can feel like nothing is easy. From payroll to PTO, from onboarding to benefits, and everything in between. It's a constant juggle of tasks, systems, and spreadsheets. But your HR software? That's the easy part. Meet Bamboo HR. Trusted by over 34,000 companies, it handles all your HR tasks, payroll, benefits, and time tracking, so your team and your company can grow as fast as, well, Bamboo. And Bamboo HR software is actually easy to use. One simple system that pulls all your people data together in one place, so you can ditch scattered systems and wasted hours on tasks that should only take minutes. Because when HR is easier, you can focus on what matters most, your people. HR is hard. Bamboo HR is easy. Ready to simplify all your HR tasks? For a limited time, get a $100 Visa gift card when you complete a free demo at bamboohr.com/gift card. Again, that's bamboohr.com/gift card. Terms and conditions apply.
Let's be honest. Most of us have a love-hate relationship with wired bras. We love the lift, but hate the digging. We love the support, but hate feeling trapped. Well, Knix just changed everything with FreeFlex, a wired bra actually designed to work with your body, not against it. FreeFlex features a revolutionary flexible wire that moves when you move, bends when you bend, and keeps everything exactly where you want it. No poking, no stabbing, no constant readjusting, just freedom to move. It also has a demi-cup shape for a natural lift with a lower neckline that flatters in everything from V-necks to dresses. And because it's from Knix, it's available in sizes for every body. Experience the first wired bra you'll actually want to wear all day. Visit Knix.com for 15% off your order with FreeFlex15. That's KNIX.com, code FreeFlex15 for 15% off. Knix.com.
Despite checking into all these local guys and dotting their I's and crossing their T's, police actually had focused their investigation less on people who knew the Scherers and more on people passing through town. They hadn't revealed this to the public, but within 72 hours of the Scherer slayings, the investigation had been given some direction, and there was a reason that the police were interested in sightings of white male suspects, and they were also interested in gray, maroon, or blue vans. And that was because they had learned that there had been another attack on the same night that Megan and Sherri were killed. At 9:33 p.m. on March 28th, a 25-year-old woman named Stephanie W. called the Dyersburg, Tennessee police and said a man had shot her. Her story was somewhat unbelievable, and some of the investigators clearly had their doubts about its veracity at first. The woman and her kids were home alone at their trailer home on Lenox Road, as her husband had gone out to meet a friend. The doors to the trailer home were open, and the victim and some of her 3 kids were outside on the unseasonably warm night. A white male pulled into her driveway in a maroon conversion van and got out of the car. Stephanie's 5-year-old daughter blurted out to him, "Daddy's not here." Great. The man said he was from Nashville and was looking for a friend's house but couldn't remember the street. All he had was his friend's name, Jeremy Taylor. Stephanie said that she didn't know where that person lived. She later said when he didn't know the name of the street, she got spooked. The man went back to his van, he said, to get a map, and Stephanie told her 12-year-old daughter to get in the house. She tried to call her brother-in-law who lived nearby, but her phone wouldn't work. She went back outside to tell the man to go to her brother-in-law's nearby for directions and that she had called. But the man didn't leave. He said, "I couldn't find my map, but I found this." He pulled a gun out from under his jacket. This is the report of Stephanie's retelling of the incident. Quote, "I said, 'Oh my God,' and grabbed the barrel of the gun and him holding the trigger. He kept saying, 'Lady, get in the trailer.' So when I got up, I still had hold of the gun and he still had hold of the trigger. So I pushed and he fell. So while he was down, I pulled on the gun, not letting go, and backed into the trailer backwards. I was telling my kids to get inside. I slammed the door on his arms. The gun was on the inside of the trailer in his hands and he was still holding the trigger, and I was still holding the barrel of the gun. He got one hand loose and fired the gun through the door, which shot me in the arm. I screamed to my kids, 'Call 911 and hand me the shotgun off the wall.' So then the man ran off. While he was struggling to get in with his hands through the door, he was saying, 'Lady, I just want your car.' And I said, 'The keys are in it. Get it and go.' But he did not leave. He kept trying to get into the trailer until he fired the gun." End quote. After shooting her, the man got in his van and drove away. Stephanie grabbed the kids, drove to her brother-in-law's house, and called the police. The bullet was taken out of her bicep at the hospital, and the bullet hole in her front door aligned with her story. But the investigators found no shell casing at the scene. Police in Missouri were alerted by police scanner traffic to this shooting that occurred on the same night as their double homicide. Corporal Sanders and Investigator J.R. O'Daniel met with Investigator Terry McCrate of the Dyer County Sheriff's Department to collect the expended round taken out of Stephanie's arm. Everyone knew that the bullet was from a .22, the same type of gun that had been used on Megan and Sherri. But a ballistics report dated July 21st, 1998 confirmed that the bullets found in Sherri and Megan's heads and in Stephanie's arm were fired from the same gun. From this moment on, police knew that the 2 crimes were committed by the same deranged man and that he appeared to be attacking vulnerable female strangers. The Dyersburg attack, 45 miles from Portageville, took place just 2.5 hours after Megan and Sherri were killed. Both happened at small, single-level, freestanding homes with no immediate neighbors, alone punctuating the flat surrounding farmland. Both were fairly close to the interstate. The investigation suddenly took on a much wider focus, with the Dyersburg area receiving equal police scrutiny as had Portageville. And the Scherer investigation took a 90-degree turn, with police now focusing on similar crimes and tips that could lead them to this lunatic. and they now had an idea of his MO, his vehicle, and what he looked like. Stephanie described the shooter as a white male over 30 years of age, 5 foot 6 inches tall, slender build, with dark, graying hair and a thin mustache. He was wearing dark pants, a plaid shirt, work boots, and glasses, and he spoke with a northern accent. He was driving a maroon van, which was possibly blue, according to Stephanie's daughter. And when he left, he was heading toward I-55 in the direction of Big Boy Junction. Corporal Sanders had Stephanie draw a composite sketch using an IBM ThinkPad laptop computer and the CD-FIT program. In November 1998, a press release was issued to numerous agencies in order to circulate the composite sketch Stephanie helped make and issue a bolo for a maroon conversion van. America's Most Wanted featured the Scherer double murder case that same month in November 98. A lot of tips came into the FBI tip line after the show aired. One woman named Stacy called in a tip about an over-the-road truck driver who had recently moved from Portageville to Texas. She said his mother owned a home 2 to 3 miles from the Scherers on the same road. Her cousin used to be married to the guy, and he was abusive and had a previous rape charge. Police looked into him, and his wife alibied him. There were a lot of tips like this, since they now had 2 geographic areas to draw from. Police received a lot of calls about men resembling the sketch, seen at gas stations, Long John Silver's, hospitals, prisons, area businesses, and so on. They collected pubic hair samples from a lot of people who resembled the sketch, but it was pretty generic, and a lot of people in Missouri and Tennessee could have been the man in the composite. Another angle police looked into was the name the Dyersburg assailant had mentioned, Jeremy Taylor. When he pulled into her driveway, the shooter told Stephanie that he was looking for the home of his friend, Jeremy Taylor. The investigators pulled the name of every Jeremy Taylor in the greater Memphis area and tracked them all down. They even asked them for pubic hair samples for comparison to those in evidence, simply because Stephanie's attacker had mentioned that name. But it didn't work. Either they didn't find the right Jeremy Taylor, or the attacker had made him up. Police also looked at violent crimes committed throughout the region and beyond, abductions, rapes, and so on. They received communications from states all over the nation about similar crimes that could be their guy. In December 1999, a lead came in about a double homicide in Stone County, Arkansas, that had happened on the 19th. Sheriff Jason contacted the Missouri and Tennessee investigators and told them his crime was similar to the Scherer double murder. In the Arkansas case, a home invasion, the victims were Gloria Bonds, age 54, and her 16-year-old niece, Rachel McNear, a high school sophomore. Gloria's husband, a truck driver, was away on a route. Her niece, Rachel, was staying with her aunt to keep her company. Gloria had been tied up with her own shoestrings with her hands behind her back. She was then shot in the temple with a shotgun. Rachel was raped and shot in the head by the same gun. She was found face down in the back bedroom of the house by her mother. In their driveway, the killer had abandoned his car, which would not start, and stole the victim's car. He made it to a Dexter, Missouri motel, spent the night, and on December 20th committed a home invasion in Illinois. He broke into the home of elderly Lulu and Richard Sylvaeus. He shot their 42-year-old daughter, Mary, in the side with a sawed-off double-barreled shotgun and battered Richard and his wife, Lulu, and then he drove off. Stone County Sheriff's Office issued a nationwide alert for Troy R. Ackerman, Jr., age 34, of Fox, Arkansas, wanted on 2 counts of capital murder, theft of property, and being a felon in possession of a firearm. Ackerman was described as a white male, 5 foot 8 inches tall, 180 to 200 pounds, with brown hair and a beard. Police in Illinois quickly caught up with him. 50 Illinois state troopers and other law enforcement officers chased him through their state into Indiana, where he shot himself when trapped on a Logansport street. He had not known his Arkansas victims, Gloria and Rachel, and he was totally crazy enough to have done the Scherer murders. But his DNA did not match the partial profile extracted from the pubic hairs on Megan. Ackerman was a different, deranged, sadistic rapist and double murderer than the one the Missouri and Tennessee investigators sought. Pretty soon, along came a suspect who took up a lot of time and energy of the investigators, because he was even more deranged and sadistic, and he was still alive and talking. In January 2000, Missouri State Highway Patrol Corporal Bud Cooper and New Madrid County Sheriff's Office Deputy Chris Hensley interviewed a man who was in prison for several similar crimes. He would, for a time, become the leading suspect in the Scherer case. His name was Tommy Lynn Sells. Just a listening note, this is going to be a fairly lengthy tangent about Tommy Lynn Sells, an infamously vicious and sadistic serial killer who was the prime suspect in this case. If hearing about him doesn't interest you, skip ahead a few minutes. Tommy Lynn Sells was the so-called coast-to-coast killer who roamed the nation between 1980 and 1999, working as a carny and committing horrific crimes. He was finally arrested on January 2, 2000, for the 1999 murder of 13-year-old Kayleen Harris, who was just about the same age as Megan Scherer. At that crime scene, he had also attempted to cut the throat of 11-year-old Crystal Searles, who survived, identified him, and later testified at his trial. According to ClarkProsecutor.org, Sells confessed to a string of murders all over the United States spanning 3 decades. He used the nickname Coast to Coast for himself to describe both his migratory lifestyle and his trail of killings. He traveled by hopping trains and stealing vehicles. Sells was nearly an Otis Toole-level confessor, claiming 20-plus murders, but he did actually commit numerous horrific murders involving children, as many as 12 is believed. According to the Texas AG's office, Sells pleaded guilty in Bexar County to strangling 9-year-old Mary Beatrice Perez, who was abducted in 1999. The missing child, who loved to dance and preferred to be called Mary B., was found dead in a creek bed a week later, clad only in a Mickey Mouse t-shirt and a single white sock. Sells is also believed to have committed the murders of Thomas and Colleen Gill and their 4-year-old daughter Tiffany in St. Louis, Missouri in 1983. Ina Court and her 4-year-old son Rory in Forsyth, Missouri in 1985. The 1999 slaying of 13-year-old Haley McHone in Kentucky, and the unbelievably horrific murders of the Dardeen family in Illinois in 1987, which I am not going to discuss, but you can look up. It's truly one of the most sickening things I've heard, and that's saying a lot. There are quite a few additional suspected victims of Tommy Lynn Sells, without a doubt one of the most depraved killers I've come across. The murders of Megan and Sherri were right in his wheelhouse. When the Missouri investigators got wind of Sells' M.O. in January 2000, they rushed right down to Texas. Tommy Lynn Sells was known to have served time for theft right there in Missouri, and was suspected of a double murder there or two, so he had a nexus to their state. Corporal Bud Cooper and Deputy Chris Hensley interviewed him on January 11, 2000, at the Valverde County Sheriff's Department in Del Rio, Texas. Deputy Hensley had called him the day before and asked him about Megan and Sherri. Now they showed up and had him sign a Miranda form and asked him if he'd given any more thought to his involvement. Sells replied that he'd been thinking about it, but he couldn't remember where he was in March of 1998. They showed him 3 photos of the Scherer residence. At this point, Sells volunteered that it couldn't have been him because they would have found a grease or oil spot located in the driveway. He said the water pump in his van was leaking at the time. They told him, quote, "If it was your water pump leaking, the spot would have been water or antifreeze, not grease or oil." Sells sat back in his seat and said, "You found one, didn't you?" He could not see the spot in the photos, so the fact that he knew about it was very intriguing. And even more interesting, he knew that the spot was on the right-hand side of the driveway. Sells explained that he really couldn't remember any specific dates in that time period because he was speedballing, i.e. using cocaine and heroin at the time. He believed that in approximately March of 1998, he was on the road, having left St. Louis, where his family lived, after ripping off a local drug dealer for an ounce of heroin. He was driving a black full-size van at the time, he said. He woke up at a rest area after coming out of a blackout, and he looked down and he had blood all over his hands, and he had no idea where it came from. Now, it has to be said that Sells was very vague about his activities in this time period. He rambled about wanting to work on a shrimp boat to get out of West Memphis, Tennessee, because he'd killed a truck driver there. He said he pawned his tools in Little Rock, Arkansas at a pawn shop near the bus station. He said he went to Holcomb, Missouri to visit and party with some friends. Then he went back to West Memphis and sold his van and a small caliber handgun to a wrecker driver at a salvage yard. Sells had no idea where he'd gotten this gun, possibly in a burglary he'd committed in Nevada, or he may have gotten it while selling drugs on the streets of St. Louis. He claimed to have used it to shoot a homeowner in the chest after burglarizing a home in Arkansas. The investigators used the opportunity to get Sells to elaborate on his prior criminal acts. In response, he said he'd killed people by strangulation, stabbing, guns, his bare hands, blunt instruments, and he'd even thrown a woman off a cliff into a quarry. He said he committed his first crime at age 13 when he pistol-whipped and raped a neighborhood girl in St. Louis. Sells said his M.O. was to talk to people and make them feel comfortable, to lure them in before springing. He was a people person and easily talked to others. He admitted that he had watched and stalked several of his victims, but said he was smart enough that he would only actually attack them if he didn't think he'd get caught. He said he always wore gloves, or wore his long sleeves over his hands and would bring a rag to wipe down the scene when he was done. He was careful and sly. Sells was very comfortable talking about his prowess as a bad dude, but he was very vague as to actual dates, names, and locations. His confessions were almost hypothetical. When Cooper and Hensley asked Sells point-blank whether he had done the crime in Missouri, he said he probably would have approached the residence to ask for water to repair his van. He said the large dogs wouldn't have scared him off. He liked animals. He said he probably would have raped the mother and not the daughter, but if the mother had done something to piss him off, he would have killed her and raped her daughter instead. He said he typically used gags because he didn't like hearing his victims yelling and screaming, and he said he often tied his victims up. He told Cooper and Hensley his favorite sexual position was doggy style, and that he had had sex with his victims before he killed them, while they were dying, and after they were dead. They asked him about lubricant, and he said he might use spit or something on the scene. No doubt horrified at Sells' blasé attitude towards sadism, rape, and murder, Cooper and Hensley asked him why he did what he did. His answer was, it was the whole package, the thrill of the unknown, the sexual gratification, and the rush he got when he killed. The adrenaline rush was better than any high he ever experienced from drugs. He bragged that he had heard more than one person take their last breath, and he said he had learned to kill his victims from his father, who taught him that dead men tell no tales. Cooper and Hensley believed that Sells was a multiple murderer more than capable of committing the Scherer double homicide. But other than the spot in the driveway, they didn't have anything actually connecting Sells to the crime. They wanted to know whether he'd actually been there. They asked Sells if he could remember anything distinctive about the Scherer house, something that would prove to them that he was there. This from the report, quote, Sells asked us if there was some type of watermelon flower located in the house, end quote. Cooper and Hensley weren't sure, but when they went back and looked at the crime scene photos and video, damned if the house wasn't decorated with a number of watermelon-themed items. Then they showed him a family portrait of the Scherers, and he said they looked familiar. He said, Sherri's got big tits, doesn't she? And he said he liked big-breasted blonde women. The crime scene photo came up showing Megan's partially dressed body, and he commented, she's not too little. After viewing the crime scene photos, Sells stated that this not only sounded like something he would do, it looked like something he would do. He then picked up a copy of the composite sketch compiled by Stephanie and his own driver's license photo from 1997 and said to the investigators, what the fuck do you want, a smoking gun? Sells gave pubic hair and blood samples on January 11th. While those were being tested, the investigators tried to track his movements back in 1998 to see if they could place him in Missouri. They were able to confirm that he'd been in St. Louis in late 1997, and then he had joined the Heart of America Traveling Carnival in Arkansas Pass, Texas. That's where he met his wife, Nora. He was with the carnival from March 8th until March 20th, 1998. But after that date, he was no longer with the carnival and his whereabouts could not be traced. Sergeant Jeff Heath interviewed Sells again on February 29, 2000, at the office of the Texas Rangers in Del Rio, Texas. Investigators had spoken with Sells' wife, Nora, the day before, and Sells was angry about this and told them to leave her out of it. Then he made a confession of sorts. Again, he could not recall dates and times, but he said he had shot the lady in Dyersburg, Tennessee, and that he knew if he shot her, then he must have killed the mother and daughter in Portageville, Missouri. He talked about shooting a woman who lived in a trailer with children, and he had shot her through the door after fighting over his gun. Of course, that's exactly what happened in the Dyersburg shooting. And the Dyersburg victim, Stephanie W., had picked Tommy Lynn Sells' driver's license photo out of a photo lineup as the man who accosted and shot her. She said she was 98% sure it was him. Sergeant Heath had also spoken with people who knew Sells and who were able to place him in Sikeston, Missouri in mid-April 1998. This was all sounding incredibly promising. Sells knew about the watermelons and the driveway spot at the Scherers. He knew about the shooting through the door of Stephanie's trailer. He was in Sikeston, 34 miles from Portageville, in mid-April 98. Tommy Lynn Sells had to be their guy. But there was a problem. Sells remained non-committal about his role in the Scherer murder and the Dyersburg shooting, and said his wife Nora told him that he hadn't done those things. She told him they were in Del Rio, Texas on March 28, 1998. He said he didn't remember this himself, but if his wife said it was so, it was so. A quote from Sergeant Heath's report. I told Sells I thought he committed the Scherer double homicide in the shooting in Dyersburg. Sells responded, quote, I want to tell you I did this, but I have to believe Nora, what she says, because she's all I have in this world. The investigators did a lot of work to try to connect Tommy Lynn Sells with the Scherer murders and the Dyersburg shooting. They tracked down his car that had been abandoned in St. Anne, Missouri, and tried to track down a black van he'd sold. They did find the buyers of the van, 3 brothers who knew Sells, who said he had tried to rape their mother in Paragould, Arkansas. They spoke with an ex-girlfriend of Sells. They spoke to his cousin and family and friends that he claimed to have stayed with or worked jobs with. They spoke with his former employers and any landlords they could find. They extensively interviewed Sells' first wife, who had had a child with him that was given up for adoption. They interviewed Sells' cousin, who said that Sells was weird, had sexual problems, and was capable of anything. The cousin told of an incident in which Sells got in his grandmother's bed and attempted to put his hands down her pants. There was another time when he was 13 that he tried to get in with his mother while she was taking a shower. Speaking of his mother, they talked to her too, who said he'd stayed with her in St. Louis while he was working for 360-degree mufflers from September 97 until he left in January 1998. Essentially, they talked to everyone they could find, trying to put together a timeline for Tommy Lynn Sells to place him in the Portageville area on March 28, 1998. But it was impossible. No one had seen him there or knew of him being there. And when the DNA came back, Tommy Lynn Sells' DNA profile did not have any of the STR markers in the partial profile the investigators were working from. Tommy Lynn Sells was the worst of the worst, absolutely capable of committing the Scherer murder, and had possibly been in the area, but he hadn't done it. Months and months of work went out the window. Tommy Lynn Sells was executed by lethal injection in Texas on April 3, 2014. No one cried. In fact, his victim, Kayleen Harris's father, proclaimed, "What a great day."
From coast to coast, unlock adventure at Red Lion Hotels by Sonesta, where restful sleep, friendly service, and local knowledge await. Whether for business or pleasure, spend less and make more of every trip. When you sign up for the Sonesta Travel Pass, you'll get their best rates instantly. Go to Sonesta.com to book your stay and unlock their best rates with Sonesta Travel Pass. Here today, roam tomorrow. Join now at Sonesta.com. Terms and conditions apply.
When you're in HR, it can feel like nothing is easy. From payroll to PTO, from onboarding to benefits, and everything in between. It's a constant juggle of tasks, systems, and spreadsheets. But your HR software? That's the easy part. Meet Bamboo HR. Trusted by over 34,000 companies, it handles all your HR tasks, payroll, benefits, and time tracking, so your team and your company can grow as fast as, well, Bamboo. And Bamboo HR software is actually easy to use. One simple system that pulls all your people data together in one place, so you can ditch scattered systems and wasted hours on tasks that should only take minutes. Because when HR is easier, you can focus on what matters most, your people. HR is hard. Bamboo HR is easy. Ready to simplify all your HR tasks? For a limited time, get a $100 Visa gift card when you complete a free demo at bamboohr.com/gift card. Again, that's bamboohr.com/gift card. Terms and conditions apply.
For period protection you can put on and forget about, nothing beats NYX leak-proof underwear. North America's #1 leak-proof underwear brand. Let's face it, life can be unpredictable, but your leak-proof underwear shouldn't be. That's why millions of people choose NYX. For periods, for light leaks, for everyday freshness. NYX undies are super comfy, super absorbent, and made to handle whatever your day throws at you. Day 2 of your period? Covered. Your daily run? No problem. That big sneeze? You know the one. Yep, we've got you. And with styles like bikinis, boy shorts, thongs, and high-rise, plus sizes from extra small to 4XL, NYX makes it easy to find your perfect fit. Say goodbye to stress and leaks, and say hello to undies that work just as hard as you do, no matter the leak. Find the style and level of protection you want at NYX.com and use code FLOW15 for 15% off. That's KNIX.com, code FLOW15 for 15% off. NYX, for your leaks, for your life.
Once the early 2000s came around, the investigators tried to do more with the DNA they had. The DNA from the Scherer case was run against the state's DNA database, and incarcerated men who shared markers in common with the partial profile were checked out via direct DNA comparisons. In 2003, the crime lab also facilitated running the profile through the convicted offender databases in Arkansas and other neighboring states, in the off chance they had a prisoner with some shared STR markers. During the time period 2003 to 2005, they collected buccal swabs from a lot of offenders, comparing them against the DNA and evidence and ruling them out. One of these guys looked at in 2005 was Jeremy Brian Jones, who was on death row in Alabama for murdering a Mobile woman. Jones had confessed to killing 20 additional people in 4 states, including Missouri, but he recanted his confession, and he wasn't Sherri and Megan's killer. On January 31, 2006, much of the Scherer homicide physical evidence was resubmitted to the MSHP crime lab. This included the sock gags, the swabs from Megan's back and left breast, vaginal swabs, cuttings from Megan's underwear, and pubic hairs found on Megan. This time, with DNA analysis having advanced 7 years from the time of the murder, MSHP crime lab analyst Ruth Montgomery was able to obtain a complete male DNA profile from the swab of the bite mark on Megan's left breast. The DNA profile finally qualified for entry into CODIS. In March 2006, the DNA from the Scherer offender was in CODIS at long last, and the database came up with a hit. The same offender who had killed Megan and Sherri had struck before, way back in 1990. CODIS matched the unknown DNA sample taken from the body of Megan Scherer to an unknown offender DNA profile developed in the investigation of the April 1990 homicide of Genevieve Zitricki in Greenville, South Carolina. It was hard to believe, but we had the DNA that was an identical match, said New Madrid County Captain Chris Hensley. The 2 cases were not at all similar, and I think it's safe to say they never would have been connected if CODIS had not linked to the same perpetrator. Let's talk about the Jenny Zitricki case. Genevieve Hegedusich was born on August 11, 1961, to parents Edward and Rosemary Hegedusich. She had a brother, Philip, and the 2 were close. Jenny grew up in Ohio and graduated from Youngstown State. She married young and was divorced when she was killed at age 28. Jenny had moved to Greenville in 1989 with her then-husband, Michael Zitricki. They had been married for 7 years and divorced once they arrived in South Carolina. Michael, the ex, actually lived in the same apartment complex, the Hidden Lakes complex on Villa Road, and he had a girlfriend, which must have been a little awkward for all 3 of them. Jenny's friends said the 2 mostly avoided each other. Jenny worked as a systems programmer analyst for Michelin and was bubbly, outgoing, friendly, and active, playing on the Michelin softball team, fishing, jumping on the small portable trampoline she kept in her bedroom, and cheering on her beloved Cleveland Browns. She had a very active social life, and the 2-story garden-style apartment complex she lived in was known for its social atmosphere. There were barbecues and pool parties and other such gatherings for the mostly single young professionals who lived there. Jenny's apartment patio faced the pool, and she was always right at the center of all things social at the complex. Pool-goers typically used the bathroom in her apartment. She let everybody in. On the night of April 3, 1990, Jenny attended a rehearsal dinner party at her upstairs neighbor's. She was in the wedding of his daughter that upcoming weekend. Her festive dress was neatly hung over a chair in her apartment, still in its dry-cleaning bag. She left the party and headed down to her ground-floor unit. The time for this is a little bit in dispute. Some witnesses said she stayed at the party until midnight. But after she got home, Jenny called her friend Lisa Richards. Lisa said she talked to Jenny that night around 10, and she said she was her usual self. That was the last time anyone spoke to her. It seems that Jenny went to bed alone. She didn't show up for work on Wednesday or Thursday. Finally, on Friday, April 6th, Jenny's Michelin coworkers called the apartment complex manager when Jenny hadn't been heard from for a couple of days. They asked him to please check on Jenny. The manager dispatched a maintenance worker to the apartment armed with a key in case no one answered the door. No one did. The maintenance worker opened the door and the apartment was dark. He called Ms. Zitricki, but heard nothing except running water. Jenny was on her back in the bathtub, which was lightly running and had spilled over the apartment floor. Her hands were up over her head and fabric wrapped around her neck. She was wearing only a t-shirt. Her legs were splayed out under the faucet so that the water was running into her genital area. Greenville Police Detective Bruce Banton was called to the scene, one of the first investigators to respond. He noted a bloody wound or wounds on Jenny's head, bruises on her face, the binding around her neck, and the staging of the scene. This was a homicide. Jenny was identified and pronounced dead by the coroner. It was estimated, based on the lack of rigor, that she'd been dead for at least 24 hours. This fit with the fact that she hadn't shown up for work in 2 days. When Jenny was removed from the bathtub and examined closely, the items around her neck turned out to be a pair of tights and a pair of pantyhose. At her autopsy, the pathologist concluded that Jenny had been bludgeoned on the back of the head by a hard object. She'd suffered blunt force trauma that fractured her skull, and she had no defensive wounds. However, the cause of death was strangulation. Basically, Jenny would likely have died from the trauma to her head, but the pantyhose tightened around her neck cut off her air supply first, killing her. A sexual assault kit was performed, and it was concluded that Jenny had been raped. The medical examiner collected biological samples. Detectives carefully observed Jenny's bedroom. It was evident she'd been attacked in her bed almost certainly while she was asleep. From a police report, quote, "In the bedroom of Zitricki's apartment, a large amount of blood was found on and around her bed, including directional blood spatter on the walls of the room." It was very evident from the bedding what had happened to Jenny. She was hit on the head more than once while she slept. The weapon was likely a tire iron or a crowbar. Her white pillowcase had blood spatter and a large bloodstain on it, and more bloodstains were on the turquoise sheet near the pillow. Detective Steve Biss of the Greenville Police Department told the Greenville News, quote, "If she was able to put up a struggle, it wasn't much of a struggle. I really don't think she knew what happened." As Jenny lay there bleeding and probably unconscious, she was raped and then strangled with a pair of pantyhose. Then her killer found something strong he could use to drag her with, a pair of tights. He tied them tightly around her neck and then used the knot as a handle, dragging Jenny 20 feet to the bathroom. Additional watery bloodstains on the bedding moved down to the foot of the bed in a diagonal pattern, showing exactly how Jenny had been dragged. A blood trail led from the bedroom to the bathroom as well. Once in the bathroom, her killer positioned her how he wanted her in the tub and started the water running. The bathroom was a mess, with bloodstains in the tub and the toilet seat up, and what appears to be blood on it and the bowl. But the surfaces were devoid of fingerprints, indicating that they had been wiped down. Then he tossed the bedroom. The bedroom was a disaster, with clothes everywhere, dresser drawers open with clothes spilling out, a teddy bear, jeans and a white shirt with small bloodstains on the rug, and the book Our Bodies Ourselves splayed open on the floor. Bloody drag marks on the carpeting showed the trajectory of Jenny being dragged to the bathroom. The brown carpeted hallway between the bathroom and bedroom was littered with scattered clothing, another teddy bear, a crumpled magazine. And a bloody toe print was found on a book on the floor titled, get this, How to Be a Bitch. The print was not Jenny's. She had been dragged to the bathroom. Her killer was running around the apartment barefoot. At the time, it wasn't clear if perhaps Jenny's killer was looking for something, but nothing of value appeared to be missing. Jewelry was sitting on the bedroom dresser in plain sight. Detectives came to believe that the killer had ransacked the apartment to make it look as though he was looking for something. He also did two other things designed to confuse investigators. Jenny's purse was dumped out into the kitchen sink and water run into it. The sink was overflowing. Jenny's checkbook and other personal items were floating. The investigators didn't know how much of any cash she had, but it seemed as though her killer was savvy, using water to destroy evidence. In addition to the purse, the killer had left an ominous message on the mirror above Jenny's dresser. "Don't fuck with my family" was scrawled in black Sharpie. Of course, investigators had to wonder whether Jenny had any dark secrets, anything to hide, or anyone who might be angry with her. I was told that the FBI profilers who consulted on the Zitricki case spent a lot of time developing a profile based on the mirror message, which turned out to have been left by the killer deliberately to derail the investigation. Investigators figured out how Jenny's killer got into the apartment. They believe she was attacked while she was sleeping. She hadn't let him in. Inspection of the windows and doors revealed that the sliding glass door to the patio had been pried open with a tool. Once inside the apartment, the assailant did not appear to be in a rush. He took a lot of time raping and killing Jenny, staging the scene, tossing the room, writing the message, and soaking the purse. It must have taken him several hours, and he clearly knew she lived alone. He was watching her. Police worked the case very hard. They interviewed everyone, Jenny's friends, family, co-workers. They couldn't find any enemies of Jenny's, and although she knew lots of people, no one had a bad word to say about her. Her ex, Michael, was cooperative and seemed legitimately shocked at the news of her death. He readily gave fingerprints and submitted to a polygraph. Michael was able to prove he wasn't home that night. He had what OG investigator Bush Banton called an ironclad alibi. Michael was eliminated. Jenny's father, who was suffering from cancer, was so devastated by the death of his little girl that he kind of lost the will to live and died within a month. The terrifying thing was the crime seemed random. Just as the Scherer case was in Portageville, Missouri, Jenny's homicide was a brutal one in relatively quiet Greenville, and the community was spooked. Single women ran out and bought guns and mace. Police were very eager to progress the investigation, but were powerless to do it. They interviewed hundreds of people and collected fingerprints from 150, hoping to compare to some partials found in the apartment. But eventually they had to move the radius of the investigation outward from Jenny's circle to a much wider suspect pool. They blanketed the nation with bulletins about the horrific murder, followed up on tips, and investigated links with crimes that seemed similar. In 1994, they investigated whether there was any connection between Jenny's murder and the crimes of Henry Louis Wallace. Wallace had strangled 3 young women in 1 month in the same apartment complex in Charlotte, North Carolina, just 1 state away, and has also attempted to strangle the 10-month-old baby of one of the women. Wallace was from Barnwell, North Carolina, and was linked to the strangulation deaths of 7 other women as well. Upon his arrest in March 1994, Charlotte police said Wallace could be connected to a murder in South Carolina. They were referring to Jenny's. He had a record in that state for sex offenses, and he had been living there when Jenny was killed. Wallace's crimes were particularly unsettling because he came across as a completely normal guy, working as a DJ. He was married and spent 4 years in the Navy. People saw him as an educated man who had many friends and gainful employment. His mother and friends were shocked at the news that he was a serial murderer. But Wallace was black and all his victims were black. Jenny was white. And eventually, DNA ruled out Henry Louis Wallace as her killer. The following year, in 1995, investigators perked up upon hearing of the arrest of 35-year-old Glenn Rogers of Ohio. Rogers had met 34-year-old Linda Price in Jackson, Mississippi, and the two lived together for a few weeks before he sexually assaulted her, stabbed her to death, and left her body in the bathtub. Within 2 weeks of that murder, he met Tina Marie Cripps, a 34-year-old maid at a Florida Ramada Inn. She was found stabbed to death in the bathroom of his motel room there. Rogers had killed at least 2 other people, and the bathtub thing was an obvious parallel. But Rogers didn't kill Jenny either. Her case went cold. Detective Tim Conroy of the Greenville Police Department and his cold case team reopened the Zitricki case in late 2005, and the offender's DNA profile developed from semen on a cervical swab taken during Jenny's autopsy was finally loaded into CODIS in August 2005. So in March 2006, when the DNA profile from the Scherer suspect was finally entered into CODIS, it generated a hit, linking the Scherer and Zitricki homicides to the same unknown man. This was absolutely staggering news to both sets of investigators in Missouri and South Carolina. Everybody was looking for patterns, Bush Banton, the detective who led the Zitricki case in 1990, told the Greenville News. Well, now they had a pattern, albeit an indistinct one, since the crimes were dissimilar and geographically disparate. Even though they had 3 known crimes and his genetic profile, they were no closer to naming this unknown suspect. And that's because Jenny's murder, like that of Megan and Sherri Scherer, was committed by an itinerant killer who had 0 connections to their towns or to the victims themselves, who wore disguises, came prepared, and was careful not to leave any fingerprints behind. This is the end of Part 1 of the cases of Megan and Sherri Scherer and Genevieve Zitricki. Part 2 is available right now.